for the Starlink satellite chain to fly right over central North Carolina.
This garland of little lights, one after another, absolutely perfectly sequenced.
There is an object roughly the size of a 20-meter spacecraft, flying in perfect formation with a Starlink cluster, 550 kilometers above your head, right now. It is not in any catalog on Earth. No nation has claimed it. No agency will name it. It moves at 28,000 kilometers per hour, holds its position to within meters, and goes dark whenever you try to look directly at it.
And so one aspect of the program is funding institutions with telescopes that can image wide swaths of the sky.
And the only reason we know it exists is because 3 strangers in 3 different cities pointed backyard telescopes at the wrong patch of sky on the same night. The signal that shouldn't be there. October, Pacific Northwest. A clear, cold night. A software engineer in Portland is running a routine pass on a cluster of Starlink satellites. He has been doing this kind of observation for years, 3 or 4 nights a week when the weather cooperates, and the routine is so familiar by now that he barely thinks about it. The telescope is mounted on a concrete pad behind his house. The laptop is open on a folding chair. A thermos of coffee is balanced on the corner of the chair because there is nowhere else to put it. His tracking software is built to flag anomalies, the kind of small statistical hiccups that almost always turn out to be noise.
We subtract the known objects and the stars from those images, and then we look for moving targets.
Tonight, it flags something, an electromagnetic signature, faint but distinct, originating from the empty space between 2 satellites. He logs it, moves on. It's the kind of thing experienced observers see and forget. He finishes the pass, he goes inside, he goes to bed. 200 kilometers north, a high school physics teacher in Seattle is doing the same pass. Different equipment, different calibration, different operator. He is in his backyard with a smaller scope, a much older laptop, and a pair of fingerless gloves because the temperature is just above freezing. His software flags the same signature in the same window of sky. He does not know the man in Portland. He has never spoken to him. They have never been on the same forum thread. Vancouver, a small business owner with a rooftop telescope, sees it too. She is the 3rd independent detection. She is the one who, 3 days later, posts the time-stamped log to a shared server because she cannot make the signal go away no matter how she recalibrates. 3 observers, 3 locations, 1 impossible signal, and not one of them coordinated with the others before the detection. They only realize they are looking at the same thing when they upload their logs to a shared server and the timestamps line up. Within a single 90-second window, 3 telescopes in 3 cities recorded the same anomaly in the same patch of sky.
I can tell this first one is a star. You can see that that object stays there. So if I load up a catalog image, which is a very old image,
the probability of that being a coincidence is small enough that nobody on the server bothers to calculate it. This is the moment the Orbital Sentinel network stops being a hobby group and starts being something else. They don't announce anything. They don't go to the press. They start checking each other's work. They rerun the calibrations. They eliminate every instrument fault they can think of. They strip out the known sources of noise from the data, one by one, and watch what remains. They cross-reference the signature against every published Starlink telemetry feed available to the public. They check whether any of the satellites in the cluster were running scheduled maneuvers that night. They weren't. They check whether there were any reported atmospheric anomalies in the region. There weren't. They check whether the signal could be a reflection from a known piece of debris. It couldn't. The signature stays. Over the next 7 days, observers in 3 more cities catch it. Always in the same patch of sky. Always when the telescope is pointed through the Starlink swarm, never when it is pointed anywhere else. Dr. Michael Chen, an astronomer at the University of British Columbia who tracks amateur networks, gets a copy of the data. It arrives in his inbox on a Tuesday morning, attached to a polite email from a contact he has known for years. He opens the file expecting another false positive. He has seen hundreds of them. He starts reading the logs. He does not finish his coffee. He calls a colleague at another institution. He reads the numbers out loud. He waits for the colleague to tell him what is wrong with the dataset. The colleague does not tell him that. The colleague tells him to send the file. Chen sends it. 2 hours later, the colleague calls back. The signal, Chen tells the network when he writes back to them that afternoon. only appears when observers are looking through the Starlink swarm. Whatever it is using the satellites as a mask. That sentence reframes everything, because if something is using Starlink as a mask, then something knows it needs to hide. A piece of debris does not know it needs to hide. A natural object does not know it needs to hide. The behavior implies awareness. The behavior implies a designer. And designers in orbit mean nation-states or actors with nation-state capabilities, what they confirmed, and what terrifies them. By mid-October, the network has hard numbers. The object sits at an altitude of approximately 550 kilometers. That is precisely the operational altitude of Starlink's primary constellation. Not close, not approximate, precisely. Its orbital velocity matches Starlink's to within the margin of measurement error. That means it is either built to the same parameters by coincidence, or it was placed there to match. It does not emit on standard radio frequencies. It does not show up reliably in optical wavelengths. When it does flicker into view, the appearances are brief and inconsistent.
Those moving targets are going to be asteroids that are in orbit around the sun.
As if its surface was specifically engineered to absorb light rather than reflect it. And then there is the part that stops the conversation cold. It maintains perfect station keeping with a specific cluster of Starlink satellites. It never deviates. Read that again. Station keeping. At 28,000 kilometers per hour, with a cluster of satellites that don't belong to it for weeks, through every orbital pass, through every atmospheric disturbance, through every gravitational perturbation, holding position, refusing to drift. Objects don't do that by accident. Debris doesn't do that. Dead satellites don't do that. To hold formation at orbital velocity, you need active propulsion. You need fuel. You need navigation systems sophisticated enough to make hundreds of micro-corrections per orbit. You need someone watching, or a computer trained to do the watching for them. Run the math. At 28,000 kilometers per hour, a 1-second delay in a course correction puts you nearly 8 kilometers off station. The orbital environment at 550 kilometers is not stable. Atmospheric drag, even at that altitude, applies a constant deceleration. The Earth's gravitational field is lumpy at that range, full of subtle variations that pull a satellite slightly off its predicted path with every orbit. To maintain a fixed relative position to another moving object, the platform has to compensate for all of it, continuously, with propellant burns calculated and executed faster than human reaction time. Every burn is fuel that has to have been carried up from Earth at significant cost. Every minute of station keeping is a minute of operational expense. The fact that this object has held position for weeks means either it has substantial fuel reserves on board, or its propulsion system is dramatically more efficient than anything publicly acknowledged. Either possibility is significant. Both mean someone is paying for this, someone is operating this, someone somewhere knows exactly what this thing is. Coordinated formation flight at orbital velocity isn't something that happens by chance. It's engineered, it's intentional, and whoever engineered it went to considerable trouble to keep it quiet. Picture a stranger who follows you for weeks, always the same distance behind, always matching your pace, never making eye contact, never explaining themselves. That is what this object is doing to Starlink in orbit right now. If unexplained things flying above our heads are your thing, hit subscribe. What we're about to get into is worse.
If we follow them up, we get a better orbit to determine if there's a higher chance of them hitting the Earth or not.
NASA's non-answer. Members of the network do what scientifically minded people are supposed to do. They go up the chain, they send a quiet, professionally worded inquiry to NASA. They include the data, they include the timestamps, they include the coordinates, they attach the spectral readings. They write the email in the careful, deferential tone that academics use when they want to be taken seriously by institutions. 2 weeks pass, then 3. The reply, when it comes, is a single paragraph. The space agency, the response reads, is aware of various objects in near-Earth orbit and maintains tracking capabilities for all catalogue debris. They continue to monitor the orbital environment with their partners and international stakeholders. That is the entire reply. No greeting beyond the first line. No signature beyond a public affairs office address. No offer to follow up. No request for additional data. No acknowledgement that the email contained data in the first place. Notice what's missing. They didn't confirm. They didn't deny. They simply didn't say. There is no acknowledgement of the specific object, no clarification on whether it is in their tracking database, no reference to whether it falls under a partner agency's purview. The phrase "all catalog debris" does the heavy lifting in the sentence, and it does it carefully, because the object the network is asking about is, by definition, not cataloged. The reply is technically true. It is also, in every way that matters, a refusal to engage. The reply is not a denial. It is a door closing. Within 48 hours, members of the network start getting follow-up emails from people they don't recognize. Polite, generic. Asking for clarification on observation methods. Asking for raw data, files. Asking, in one case, for the specific make and model of the telescope used in the Portland detection. The emails come from addresses with credible institutional affiliations, but no one in the network can verify whether those affiliations are real. One member tries to look up the sender on LinkedIn and finds a profile with no photograph, no posts, and a single connection. Another tries to call the listed phone number for the institution and gets a generic switchboard that cannot find the person by name. They start being more careful about what they share. They move some conversations off the open server. They stop posting raw coordinates publicly. That is the texture of the silence. Not loud, not threatening, just present. Who could be flying it? Start with the United States. The Department of Defense maintains classified reconnaissance assets in near-Earth orbit. Always has. The National Reconnaissance Office runs an entire portfolio of platforms whose existence is not denied, but whose capabilities are not publicly characterized. The size profile of this object, somewhere between 5 and 20 meters, fits comfortably inside the envelope of known American military hardware. The capability exists. The motive exists. Starlink is an American constellation, and there are scenarios where the US government might want to position monitoring assets within its own commercial network without telling anyone, including the company that owns the network. Plausible deniability cuts in every direction in orbit, including against your own allies and your own contractors.
So these are the type of images that we get back from the telescope.
Now, China. China's space program has matured at a pace Western analysts did not predict. They have demonstrated rendezvous and proximity operations. They have deployed their own satellite networks. They have a strategic interest in Starlink that borders on the existential because Starlink reshapes who controls global communications, and China is not the one doing the reshaping. Placing a covert observer inside the constellation would yield exactly the kind of intelligence China would pay almost any price to obtain. Now Russia. Russian inspector satellites have been documented sliding up next to American assets in orbit, holding position for days at a time, then drifting away without explanation or apology. There are official US government reports of this happening to military reconnaissance platforms in the past decade. The intercepts were never publicly resolved. The Russian satellites involved were never officially identified beyond catalog numbers. This is a known Russian playbook. The technical capability is there. The pattern is there. The willingness to do it without disclosure is documented in incident reports going back years. And then the option nobody wants to talk about: a private actor, a nation-state proxy, a defense contractor running a black program for a buyer that doesn't appear in any procurement database. The barrier to placing hardware in low Earth orbit has collapsed in the last decade. A single SpaceX rideshare mission carries dozens of payloads at a time, and the manifests for those payloads are not always public. There are now more entities capable of doing this than there are governments willing to admit it. 4 candidates, each plausible, none claiming the asset. The theories, none of them are comforting. Inside the network, 3 theories have hardened into the leading explanations. The first is debris, a fragment from a satellite collision, a piece of an anti-satellite weapons test that failed to fully deorbit. The simplest explanation is usually the right one, and a piece of orbital junk drifting near a Starlink cluster would be the simplest explanation here, except it doesn't fit. Debris tumbles, debris drifts. Debris follows chaotic paths shaped by atmospheric drag and the slow leak of orbital energy. Debris doesn't navigate. Debris doesn't hold formation. The object the network is tracking is doing both. The Debris theory dies the moment you look at the station keeping data. The second theory is a classified reconnaissance satellite. The proximity to Starlink is not a coincidence. It is camouflage. Starlink generates enormous electromagnetic noise.
When an asteroid is first discovered, the Minor Planet Center is able to calculate kind of a location on the sky where it should be.
Thousands of active transponders in close proximity create a kind of background static that any nearby asset can use as cover. A spy satellite hiding inside that noise would be effectively invisible to most ground-based detection systems. Radar returns get muddied. Optical signatures get lost in the procession of bright objects moving across the sky in formation. Even professional observatories struggle to isolate individual targets inside the constellation. The amateurs only caught it because they were specifically watching the noise itself, looking for patterns rather than signals. They were not trying to find a satellite. They were trying to understand a swarm, and inside the swarm, they found something the swarm was hiding. This theory fits the behavior. It also fits documented patterns of how spy satellites are known to operate, which is exactly why it is so plausible, and exactly why it is so disturbing. The third theory is more speculative, and it might be worse than the second. Several space agencies, including the United States, China, and the European Space Agency, have been quietly investing in what is called active debris removal. The orbital environment is becoming dangerously congested. Tens of thousands of dead satellites and fragments now circle the planet, each one a potential collision threat. A single collision can cascade. A piece of debris the size of a paint chip, traveling at orbital velocity, carries enough kinetic energy to disable a working satellite. A fragmentation event in the wrong altitude band could render entire orbital shells unusable for decades. Cleaning up that mess requires technology that can rendezvous with another object in orbit, match its velocity precisely, and either capture it or push it into a re-entry trajectory. That technology is being developed, some of it is being tested. Most of those tests are not announced. There are at least 3 ongoing programs in the public record, and there are widely assumed to be others that are not. The capabilities being demonstrated, autonomous rendezvous, robotic capture, controlled deorbit, are exactly the capabilities that would let an object hold formation indefinitely with a Starlink cluster. Here is the dark version of that theory. The exact same technology that removes debris can be used to disable, capture, or destroy active satellites belonging to other nations. A debris removal platform and an anti-satellite weapon are, mechanically, almost the same machine. The only difference is intent, and intent is invisible from the ground. If what's flying near Starlink is a proximity operations test platform, then someone is rehearsing for something. The question is, what?
One of the tricky things with searching for near-Earth objects is that some of them are extremely dark.
Why the truth may never surface. If a government knows what this object is, the obvious question is why they don't simply say so. The answer is uncomfortable but straightforward. Acknowledging a classified asset confirms its existence. Confirmation gives adversaries the ability to model its capabilities. They can deduce its imaging resolution, its communication protocols, its maneuver envelope, its fuel reserves. Each piece of information becomes a tactical lever. Adversary intelligence services build target packages out of exactly this kind of public confirmation. A single press conference can compromise a billion-dollar program. The cost of confirmation is the destruction of the asset's strategic value. Acknowledging a proximity operations test reveals the existence of the program. The capability becomes diplomatic ammunition. The other nuclear powers start asking pointed questions. Treaty negotiations get harder. Adversaries accelerate their own programs to match. The arms control community has spent decades trying to keep orbital weapons systems out of the public conversation, on the theory that the conversation itself accelerates the proliferation. Confirming a proximity operations platform would burn through that theory in a single news cycle. Acknowledging a foreign asset on top of an American constellation forces a response. If the United States publicly identifies a Chinese or Russian platform shadowing Starlink, the public expects action. Action means escalation. Escalation in orbit is a category of risk that no government wants to manage in real time, in the open, with the press watching. The diplomatic protocols for handling this kind of incident are essentially non-existent. There is no orbital equivalent of an embassy summons. There is no precedent for what comes next. For Starlink itself, the corporate position is just as bad. Confirming that an unknown object is using your constellation as cover invites every regulator and every shareholder to ask the same question. How did this happen? Who else could be doing it? What else are you not seeing? The questions don't have good answers. The honest answer to most of them is, we don't know. And we don't know is not a sentence that publicly traded companies say comfortably. The result is a silence that everyone has incentive to maintain. The amateurs publish their data. The institutions don't respond. The story sits in a strange middle space, too well documented to dismiss, too inconvenient to confirm. Dr. Sarah Rodriguez, an astrophysicist at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, addressed exactly this gap in a recent interview. She didn't talk about the specific object. She wouldn't. The interviewer asked her about it twice, in two different ways. Both times she steered the conversation back to the broader system. She talked about the system that should have caught it. Our tracking infrastructure, she said, was built on the assumption that all major orbital assets would be reported, registered, or at least recognized. That assumption no longer holds. There are more launches now, from more actors, than the cataloging systems were ever designed to handle.
And that means that when we look for them using the sunlight that reflects off their surfaces, they're actually hard to spot because they're dim and faint.
Surveillance of space is harder than people generally appreciate. She let the sentence sit. She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. The interviewer tried once more. He asked her directly whether the object the amateur network had detected was something her colleagues at JPL were aware of. Rodriguez paused. She said she could not comment on specific objects. She said the broader question, the one about the cataloging system, was the more important one. Then she changed the subject. What she meant, without saying it, is that the network of amateurs in the Pacific Northwest didn't catch the object because they were better than the institutions. They caught it because the institutions are no longer capable of catching everything. The amateurs filled a gap that should not exist in the first place. Every actor with a launch capability now has plausible deniability. Every classified asset benefits from the erosion of cataloging. The orbital environment has become something close to a frontier again, and frontiers have always been places where the rules don't quite apply. The amateurs were the first to notice. They will not be the last. But the noticing does not produce answers. It only produces more silence. What's still up there, right now? The amateur network is still watching. Every clear night, somewhere across the western half of North America, a backyard telescope is pointed at the patch of sky where the object continues to hold its position. The data keeps coming in. The pattern hasn't changed, the object hasn't moved, hasn't drifted, hasn't broken formation. The Portland engineer is still running his nightly passes. The Seattle teacher has added a second telescope to his backyard. The Vancouver business owner has been joined by 2 new observers in her city. Both of them recruited through the same forums that started the network in the first place. It has been there for weeks. It will be there tonight. It will be there when the credits roll on this video. The data has been uploaded to scientific preprint servers. Coordinates, timestamps, spectral readings, the full record. Anyone with the equipment and the patience can verify it. Some have. Observers in Arizona have confirmed the signal. Observers in Colorado have confirmed it. A small group in northern Mexico has confirmed it. The independent confirmations keep arriving. The institutional silence keeps holding. There is no resolution coming, not soon. Maybe not ever. The object will eventually be identified, or it will not. Whoever placed it there will eventually disclose its existence, or they will quietly deorbit it before anyone is forced to. The decision will not be made by the public. The public will not be informed when it is made. What the amateurs have proven is narrower than what the public would want them to have proven. They have not proven who built it. They have not proven what it does. They have proven only that something is up there which should not be up there, and that the institutions equipped to identify it are not going to. The next time you walk outside on a clear night and look up at the train of Starlink satellites moving across the sky, count them. There will be more than you expect. They move in a slow procession, evenly spaced, bright enough to mistake for a string of distant aircraft. The procession will pass overhead in roughly 4 minutes. You will see what your eye is trained to see. You will see a chain of bright points moving in formation, and you will assume that what you are seeing is the entire story. It is not. Somewhere inside that procession, in a gap your eye cannot resolve and your phone cannot photograph, there is an object holding position, watching, waiting, belonging to someone who has decided you are not allowed to know. It is up there right now. It will be up there when this video ends. It will be up there tomorrow, holding formation, going dark when you try to look at it, matching the speed of the satellites in front of it and behind it down to the meter, hour after hour, orbit after orbit, with no one on the ground able or willing to say what it is. Drop a comment. Classified US asset, Chinese spy platform, or something neither government will ever name. Subscribe, because next week we're going inside the orbital incident the Pentagon still won't admit happened. The sky is no longer empty. It hasn't been for a long time. The only thing that has changed is that, for 1 week in October, 3 strangers in 3 different cities looked up at the same moment, looked at the same patch of sky, and saw the gap where the silence lives.